The stones hit the wagon before the words did. Clara Meyerson didn't flinch when the first one struck the wooden bed behind her. She'd learned not to. The second grazed her shoulder sharp enough to sting through the worn fabric of her black mourning dress. Still she kept her eyes forward, reins loose in her gloved hands, the mule plodding slow through the main street of Salvation Creek like it had all the time in the world. "Murderer." The voice came from somewhere near the general store. Clara didn't turn to see who'd said it. She knew them all by now, knew their faces, their children's names, the way they'd once smiled at her when Jacob was alive, before the fever, before the accusations. "Should have hung with him," another voice spat. A clod of dirt exploded against the wagon wheel. Laughter followed, high and cruel. Clara's jaw tightened, but her hands stayed steady. 3 more blocks to the edge of town, then the open road, then nothing but dust and distance between her and this place that had once been home. She'd sold everything. The house Jacob built. The furniture his grandfather brought over from Pennsylvania. The china her mother gave her on their wedding day. All of it gone for a fraction of what it was worth, because no one in Salvation Creek wanted anything touched by a woman they believed had poisoned her own husband. The wagon lurched as the mule navigated a rut. Clara's hand instinctively went to the small wooden box wedged beside her on the seat, the only thing she'd refused to sell. Inside was Jacob's watch, a single photograph, and the letter from the doctor in Santa Fe. The letter that proved she was innocent. The letter no one in this town would read. "Get out and don't come back." This voice was closer. Clara's eyes flicked left just long enough to see Abigail Crane standing on the boardwalk, arms folded, face twisted with righteous fury. Abigail, who'd sat beside Clara in church every Sunday for 5 years. Abigail, whose son Clara had nursed through scarlet fever the winter before Jacob died. Clara looked away. The edge of town was just ahead now, past the saloon, past the livery, past the... The gunshot cracked the air like a whip. The mule screamed and reared, and Clara grabbed the seat to keep from being thrown. Her heart hammered as the animal bucked once, twice, then stilled, trembling and wild-eyed. The street had gone silent. Clara turned slowly. A man stood in the middle of the road, 20 feet back, tall, dusty, a rifle still raised to his shoulder, smoke curling from the barrel. He wasn't aiming at her. The shot had gone high, into the air. A warning. "That's far enough," he called. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. She didn't recognize him, didn't know his face, but she knew the type. Drifter, gun for hire, someone the town had paid to make sure she understood she wasn't welcome. "I'm leaving," Clara said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "That's what you want, isn't it?" The man lowered the rifle, but he didn't move. "You took something that don't belong to you." Clara's breath caught. "I took nothing." "The horse," he said. "Jacob Meyerson's buckskin. Been told it's worth more than that mule you're dragging around." She felt the blood drain from her face. "That horse was sold 3 weeks ago to a buyer in Grafton." "Then you got money you shouldn't have." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Town says you owe debts, says Jacob's family wants restitution." Jacob's family? His brother Samuel, who'd called her a whore at the funeral, who'd demanded the house, the land, everything Jacob left behind, because he couldn't stomach the idea of a woman, a suspected murderer, keeping what was rightfully his kin's. Clara's hands tightened on the reins. I owe nothing. I paid what was owed. The rest is mine. Not how they see it. The man took a step forward, and Clara's stomach twisted. Around them, the street was still watching. No one moved to help. No one spoke. You gonna shoot me? Clara asked quietly. The man tilted his head like he was considering it. Depends. You gonna make this easy or hard? Her mouth was dry. She had no gun, no knife. Nothing but the small box beside her and a wagon full of clothes she'd probably sell for pennies in the next town over. I'm leaving, she said again. That's all I want. To leave. The man studied her. Then he glanced past her toward the edge of town, and something shifted in his expression. Clara didn't dare turn to see what he was looking at. Maybe you don't get to, he said. And then from behind her, another voice, low, calm, dangerous. Maybe she does. Clara's breath stopped. She turned, slow, and saw him. Another man, on foot, standing just beyond her wagon, near the shadowed mouth of the alley, beside the livery. He wore a long duster the colour of old leather, and his hat was pulled low enough that she couldn't see his eyes, but she could see the gun on his hip, and the way his hand rested on it, easy and deliberate, like it had been there 1,000 times before. The man with the rifle shifted his weight. This ain't your business, friend. Didn't say it was. The stranger's voice was quiet, but it carried. Just said maybe she gets to leave. You know this woman? Nope. Then why are you standing there? The stranger's hand didn't move from his gun. Because I'm tired of watching cowards throw rocks at widows. The silence that followed was suffocating. Clara felt every eye on the street turn toward them. Somewhere behind her, a door creaked shut. The man with the rifle's jaw tightened, and for a moment Clara thought he might actually pull the trigger. But then he lowered the weapon, slowly. Not in surrender, just in reassessment. You don't know what she's done, the rifleman said. Don't care, the stranger replied. Town says she killed her husband. Town says a lot of things. The rifleman's lip curled. You calling me a liar? I'm calling you a man with a gun pointed at an unarmed woman in a wagon. The stranger took a single step forward, and Clara felt the air shift. That make you feel strong? The rifleman's face flushed red. You best move along before this gets ugly. It's already ugly. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might crack a rib. She wanted to speak, to tell the stranger to stop, to leave, to not risk his life for someone he didn't even know. But her voice was locked in her throat. The stranger finally looked at her. Just for a second. His face was weathered, scarred along the jawline, and his eyes, grey, sharp, unreadable, held hers just long enough for her to see something she hadn't seen in months. Belief, not pity, not suspicion, just belief. He looked back at the rifleman. She's leaving. Let her. And if I don't? The stranger's expression didn't change. Then I reckon you'll wish you had. For a long, terrible moment, nothing moved. The street was frozen. The rifleman's knuckles were white around the rifle stock. Clara could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the math of pride versus survival. Then from the boardwalk, a new voice. Let her go, Taggart. Clara turned. It was Thomas Wills, the owner of the grain supply. A portly man with thinning hair and a reputation for fairness back when fairness still mattered in this town. He stood with his arms crossed, his face grim. "We wanted her gone," Wills said. "She's going, that's enough." Taggart, the rifleman, glared at him. "Samuel Myerson paid me to—" "Samuel Myerson's a drunk and a fool," Wills interrupted. "And you're about to start a bloodbath in the middle of Main Street over a woman who ain't even armed. That sound like justice to you?" Taggart's jaw worked. He looked back at the stranger who hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. Finally, Taggart spat into the dirt and lowered the rifle completely. "She better not come back," he muttered. "She won't," Clara said, and her voice cracked just slightly. "I won't." Taggart turned and walked away, boots heavy on the packed earth. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring, unsatisfied but unwilling to push further. Clara's hands were shaking now, adrenaline flooding through her in a cold, nauseating wave. She looked at the stranger. He tipped his hat. "Mum! Wait!" Clara's voice came out too loud. She swallowed. Thank you. No need." "There is." She clutched the reins tighter. "You could have been killed." "Could have." He shrugged, like it didn't matter. "Wasn't." "Why did you—" She didn't know how to finish the question. The stranger glanced down the street where Taggart had disappeared into the saloon. Then he looked back at her, because somebody should have. Before Clara could respond, he turned and started walking toward the livery. Just like that. No goodbye. No explanation. "Wait," she called again. He paused. "What's your name?" For a moment, she didn't think he'd answer. Then he looked over his shoulder. "Cole," he said. "Cole Everett. I'm Clara Myerson." He nodded once. "Safe travels, Mrs.
Myerson. And then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the livery like he'd never been there at all. Clara sat there for a long moment, heart still racing, hands still trembling. Then she snapped the reins and the mule lurched forward. She didn't look back. But as the town of Salvation Creek faded behind her, she couldn't stop thinking about the man who'd stepped into the street when no one else would. And she couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't seen the last of Cole Everett. The road stretched flat and empty under a sky the color of old bruises. Clara had been riding for 2 hours when she saw the dust. At first, she thought it was wind, but the air was still heavy with the kind of heat that made breathing feel like work.
She pulled the mule to a stop and squinted back the way she'd come. 3 riders, maybe 4, too far to see faces, but close enough to know they were coming fast. Clara's stomach dropped. She snapped the reins hard, and the mule broke into a reluctant trot. The wagon jolted and creaked, and Clara gripped the seat to keep from being thrown. Her mind raced. There was nothing out here, no town, no ranch, just open land and distant mesas and nowhere to hide. The hoofbeats grew louder. She risked a glance back. 3 riders, definitely, closing the gap. One of them raised an arm, shouting something she couldn't hear. Clara's breath came short and sharp. She urged the mule faster, but the animal was old and stubborn and already winded. The wagon wasn't built for speed.
She wasn't going to outrun them. The riders were close enough now that she could make out details. The lead man wore a dark hat. The one on the left had a rifle across his saddle. The third, Clara's blood turned to ice. Samuel Myerson, Jacob's brother, the man who'd called her a murderer at the funeral, the man who'd tried to take everything she had left, And now he was here, riding her down in the middle of nowhere with 2 hired guns at his side. "Stop the wagon!" Samuel's voice cracked across the distance like a whip. Clara didn't stop. "Clara, stop, damn you!" The riders pulled alongside her, boxing her in. The mule slowed, confused, and Clara hauled back on the reins before the animal panicked. The wagon skidded to a halt, dust swirling around them.
Samuel dismounted, his face red and slick with sweat. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick through the middle, with Jacob's nose but none of his kindness. The 2 men with him stayed mounted, watching her with flat, unreadable eyes. "You didn't think you'd get away that easy, did you?" Samuel said. Clara forced herself to meet his gaze. "I don't want trouble, Samuel." "Trouble?" He laughed, harsh and bitter. "You killed my brother and you're talking about trouble?" "I didn't kill Jacob." Her voice shook, but she held it steady. The doctor said fever." Samuel spat into the dirt. "But we both know better, don't we? I loved him. You loved his money, his land."
"Everything he built, you took." "I took nothing that wasn't mine." Samuel stepped closer, and Clara's hands tightened on the reins. "That horse you sold, the buckskin, that was Jacob's prize animal, worth $300 easy. You had no right." "I had every right. I was his wife." "You're a whore and a thief." Samuel's voice dropped, venomous. "And I want what you owe." Clara's chest tightened. "I don't owe you anything." "The money from the horse, the house, the land, all of it." He gestured to the wagon. "Everything in there. All of it belongs to Jacob's blood, not some outsider who wormed her way into his bed." "I'm not giving you anything." Samuel's jaw clenched. He looked at the 2 men on horseback. "Search the wagon." "No!" Clara started, but one of the men was already dismounting. She tried to stand, to block him, but Samuel grabbed her arm and yanked her down. She hit the ground hard, pain shooting through her shoulder. "Stay down!" Samuel growled. Clara struggled to her knees, gasping. The hired man was already tearing through her belongings, clothes, blankets, the small bundle of food she'd packed. He tossed it all into the dirt without care. "Where's the money?" Samuel demanded. "There is no money." "Liar! I spent it on debts. On—" Samuel backhanded her. The world spun. Clara tasted copper. Her cheek burned, and tears sprang to her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to give him the satisfaction.
"You're going to tell me where it is," Samuel said, his voice low and dangerous, "or I'm going to make you wish you had." Clara's breath came in ragged gasps. The hired man pulled the wooden box from the wagon seat, the one thing she'd tried to protect, and held it up. "This it?" "No!" Clara lurched forward, but Samuel shoved her back down. The man pried the box open. Jacob's watch tumbled into his palm, the photograph, the letter from the doctor. "That's all?" Samuel snatched the watch, examined it, then pocketed it. "Where's the rest?" "There is no rest," Clara whispered. Samuel stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded to the man with the rifle. "Burn it!" "No!" Clara screamed, but the man was already moving. He pulled a match from his pocket, struck it against his boot, and tossed it into the wagon. The dry wood caught instantly. Clara scrambled to her feet, but Samuel grabbed her, holding her back as flames consumed everything she had left. The clothes, the blankets, the photograph of her and Jacob on their wedding day. All of it gone. Samuel released her, and Clara collapsed to her knees, sobbing. The heat of the fire washed over her, and she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't. A gunshot split the air. Samuel's hat flew off his head. Everyone froze. Clara looked up, tears blurring her vision, and saw him, Cole Everett, on horseback, rifle in hand, 50 yards away and closing fast. "Next one ain't a warning," Cole called. Samuel's face went white. The two hired men reached for their guns, but Cole fired again, into the dirt at their horses' hooves. The animals reared and bolted, throwing one man and sending the other scrambling to stay in the saddle. Cole rode straight into the chaos, his rifle trained on Samuel. "You touch her again and I'll put you in the ground." Samuel backed up, hands raised, his face twisted with fury. "This ain't your fight." "It is now," Cole said. And Clara, still kneeling in the dirt, realized she was no longer alone. Cole didn't dismount. He kept the rifle level, his eyes locked on Samuel, who stood frozen with his hands half raised, like a man caught between defiance and survival. "Get on your horse," Cole said quietly. Samuel's jaw tightened.
"You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing. You don't leave now. You won't leave at all." The two hired men had recovered their horses, but neither made a move for their guns. They watched Cole with the kind of wary stillness that came from recognizing a man who knew how to kill and wouldn't hesitate if pressed. Samuel glanced at the burning wagon, then back at Clara, still on her knees in the dirt. His lip curled. "She's got you fooled, whoever you are. Got my brother fooled too, and look where that got him." Cole's expression didn't change. "I'm counting to 3. "You're making a mistake." 1. Samuel took a step toward his horse. 2. He swung into the saddle, his face flushed red with humiliation and rage. "This ain't over," he spat at Clara. "You hear me? This ain't—" Cole fired into the ground between Samuel's horse and the others. The animals bolted, and the 3 men had no choice but to ride hard or be thrown. Within seconds, they were nothing but dust and noise, disappearing back towards Salvation Creek. The silence that followed felt enormous. Cole lowered the rifle and finally looked at Clara. She was still kneeling, her hands pressed into the dirt, her face streaked with tears and dust. The wagon was a skeleton of flame behind her, black smoke curling into the pale sky, everything she'd had left in the world reduced to ash. Cole dismounted slowly. He didn't approach her right away, just stood there, rifle in one hand, the reins of his horse in the other, watching her like he wasn't sure if she wanted him close or not. "You hurt?" he asked. Clara shook her head, then nodded, then shook it again because she didn't know how to answer. Her cheek throbbed where Samuel had hit her. Her shoulder ached from where she'd been thrown to the ground. But the real pain was deeper, colder, the kind that didn't have a wound to show for it. Cole crouched down a few feet away, setting the rifle aside. "Can you stand?" she tried. Her legs wobbled, and she had to brace herself with one hand, but she got to her feet. The world tilted slightly, and Cole moved like he might catch her, but she steadied herself before he could. "I'm fine," she whispered. He didn't argue. They stood there in the silence, the fire crackling behind her.
Clara stared at the remains of the wagon and felt the weight of it settle over her like a shroud. No clothes, no food, no photograph of Jacob, just the dress on her back and the dirt under her nails. "Why did you follow me?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Cole glanced back toward the road. "Had a feeling they weren't done with you." "You didn't have to." "No," he agreed. "I didn't." Clara looked at him then, really looked at him, the scar along his jaw, the way he held himself, like a man who'd seen too much and couldn't unsee it. The rifle within arm's reach, even now. "You could have been killed," she said. "Could have." He shrugged. "You keep saying that, because it's true. So's a lot of things." He looked at her, and his grey eyes were steady. "Don't make 'em worth worrying about." Clara didn't know what to say to that. She turned back to the fire. The flames were dying now, leaving only charred wood and smoke. The mule had run off during the chaos, disappearing into the empty landscape. She was stranded. "You got anywhere to go?" Cole asked. Clara almost laughed. It came out bitter. "No." "Family?" "Dead." "Friends?" She gestured vaguely toward Salvation Creek. "You saw what I've got for friends." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, walked to his horse, and pulled a canteen from the saddle. He held it out to her. Clara hesitated, then took it. The water was warm and metallic, but she drank anyway, realizing only then how thirsty she was. "There's a town about a day's ride west," Cole said. "San Rafael. Small but decent. You could find work there, start over." "With what?" Clara handed the canteen back. "I have nothing." "You're alive." "Barely." "Still counts." She wanted to argue, wanted to scream that being alive wasn't enough when everything else had been taken. But she didn't have the strength. Cole studied her for a long moment, then sighed. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He held it out. Clara stared at it. "What is that?" "Money." "I can't." "You can." He pressed it into her hand before she could refuse. "Enough to get you to San Rafael, buy some supplies, find a place to stay while you figure things out." Clara looked down at the pouch, her throat tight. "Why are you doing this?" Cole didn't answer right away. He turned toward the horizon where the sun was starting its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. "I had a sister once," he said quietly. "Ellen. She was kind, too kind maybe, married a man who seemed decent enough, but he wasn't, and when she finally got the courage to leave him, no one helped her, no one stood up. They said it wasn't their business." Clara's chest tightened. "She didn't make it to the next town," Cole continued. "He caught up with her on the road, and by the time anyone found her, it was too late." He looked back at Clara, and there was something raw in his eyes. "I wasn't there," he said. "I was off chasing some job that didn't matter, and I've carried that with me every day since." Clara's vision blurred.
"I'm sorry." "Don't be." He picked up his rifle. "Just take the money, get somewhere safe. That's enough." She wanted to say more, wanted to tell him that he'd saved her life, that she'd never forget it, that she wished there was something she could do to repay him. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she just nodded. Cole mounted his horse. For a moment, Clara thought he'd ride off without another word. But he paused, looking down at her. "You didn't kill your husband," he said. It wasn't a question. Clara's breath hitched. "No, I didn't." "I know." And somehow, hearing him say it, this stranger, who owed her nothing, made something inside her break and mend at the same time. "Thank you," she whispered. Cole tipped his hat.
Then he turned his horse and rode west toward the setting sun. Clara stood there until he was gone. Then she looked down at the pouch in her hand, feeling its weight. It wasn't much, but it was enough. San Rafael was everything Cole said it would be, small, dusty, and unremarkable. But it was also something Clara hadn't expected, indifferent. No one knew her here. No one whispered when she walked by. No one threw stones or called her a murderer. She was just another widow in a territory full of them, trying to make a life out of what was left. She found work at the boarding house on the edge of town, cleaning rooms and cooking meals for travelers passing through. The pay was modest, but it came with a roof over her head and enough to eat. Mrs. Callahan, the owner, was a stern woman with grey hair and a limp, but she didn't ask questions and she didn't tolerate gossip. Clara was grateful for both. Weeks passed, then months. Clara folded linens and scrubbed floors and slowly, carefully began to breathe again. She didn't talk much, kept to herself. But sometimes, late at night, she'd sit on the porch of the boarding house and watch the stars, and she'd think about Cole Everett. She wondered where he'd gone, what he was doing, if he ever thought about the woman he'd saved on a lonely road. She told herself it didn't matter, but she kept the leather pouch he'd given her, even after the money was long spent. It sat in the drawer beside her bed, a reminder that kindness still existed, even in a world that felt determined to prove otherwise. One afternoon in late autumn, Clara was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. She glanced up, shading her eyes against the sun, and froze. Cole Everett sat astride a roan mare, his duster dusty and his hat pulled low. He looked older somehow, more tired, but his eyes were the same, sharp, steady. Clara's heart kicked hard in her chest. She set down the basket and walked toward him, slowly, like she was afraid he might vanish if she moved too fast. "Mr. Everett," she said, and her voice came out quieter than she intended. He tipped his hat. "Mrs."
"Meyerson." They stood there for a moment, the space between them heavy with things unsaid. "What are you doing here?" Clara asked. Cole glanced toward the boarding house, then back at her. "Heard this was a good place to rest for a while. Thought I'd see if it was true." Clara's throat tightened. "You came all this way just to rest?" His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Something like that." She didn't believe him, but she didn't push. "Mrs. Callahan has rooms," Clara said. "I can get you one if you'd like." "I'd appreciate that." She nodded and turned to lead him inside, but he spoke again, stopping her. "How've you been?" Clara looked back at him. There were 100 things she could say, that she was surviving, that she was lonely.
That some nights she still woke up thinking she heard Samuel's voice. That she thought about Cole more often than she should. "Better," she said finally. "Thanks to you." Cole's expression softened, just slightly. "Good." He stayed for 3 days. At first, Clara told herself it was coincidence, that he was just passing through. But on the second day, she caught him watching her while she worked, and on the third, he helped her carry firewood without being asked. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. On the evening of the third day, Clara found him sitting on the porch, cleaning his rifle. She sat down beside him, keeping a respectful distance. "You're leaving tomorrow, aren't you?" she asked. Cole didn't look up. "Yeah." "Where will you go?" "Don't know yet. Somewhere that needs help, I guess." Clara nodded. She'd expected as much. Men like Cole didn't stay in one place for long. They drifted, chased work, chased trouble, chased whatever it was that kept them moving. "Will you come back?" she asked quietly. He paused, his hand stilling on the rifle. Then he looked at her, and for the first time she saw something uncertain in his eyes. "Would you want me to?" Clara's breath caught. She'd asked herself the same question 100 times, told herself it was foolish, that she barely knew him, that she had no right to want anything from him. But the truth was simpler than that. "Yes," she said. Cole held her gaze for a long moment. Then he set the rifle aside and nodded. "Then I will." He left at dawn, the way men like him always did. Clara stood on the porch and watched him ride out, the same way she'd watched him leave before. But this time she didn't feel abandoned, because this time she believed him. 6 months later. The sun was setting over San Rafael when Clara saw the rider coming up the road. She was in the garden behind the boarding house, pulling weeds, and she felt her pulse quicken before she even looked up. She knew the shape of him by now, the way he sat a horse, the tilt of his hat. Cole. She stood, brushing the dirt from her hands, and waited. He dismounted slowly like he was testing the ground and walked toward her. He looked thinner, more weathered, but his eyes were the same. "Mrs. Meyerson?" he said. Clara smiled. "Mr. Everett." He glanced around the garden, then back at her. "Place looks good." "It's home." "Yeah," he said quietly. "I can see that." They stood there in the fading light, and Clara felt something settle inside her, something she hadn't realized was still restless. "You staying this time?" she asked. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real smile, small and rare. "If you'll have me." Clara's chest tightened, and she realized she was crying. Not from sadness, not from grief, just relief. The kind that came from finally, not being alone. "I will," she whispered. Cole reached out, slow and careful, and took her hand. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Years later, when Clara was old and her hair had gone silver, she would sit on that same porch and remember the day the world tried to throw her away. She would remember the stones, the fire, the fear. But more than that, she would remember the man who stepped into the road when no one else would. The man who believed her when no one else did. The man who became her home. And she would smile, because some stories, no matter how they begin, find a way to end right.